Good morning and welcome back to the GCTI podcast. Today with me, I have Dr. Hunter Taylor. Doctor, thank you for being with me. I hope you're ready for a bunch of questions.
Absolutely.
You are perfect. Okay, so let me give your bio quickly. And if I forget anything, you tell me I'm wrong or I'm right. We fix the
Sure.
problem and we carry on with this. Okay. I set up a few questions as well for you and I to go through. I mean, what I want to show to the people who are listening to us is at GCTI we have a various span of people, and the fun part is when we gather together, we become like a hell of a team because we're from every different areas and we mix together. Right. So let's start with your bio. I mean, I've done your bio during the town hall, but let's do it again for the one who don't know or didn't watch it. So you are formerly from Canada, Ontario, the east side of Canada, right?
Yes.
You did your master in philosophy and you did a PhD in philosophy at Oxford, and an history of science and medicine, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And now you've moved your subjects of research towards emergency preparation and response to disaster, pandemics, and so on and so forth, correct?
Yeah.
Which kind of makes sense that nowadays you work with the Global Counterterrorism Institute, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Are you still in Canada or you move somewhere else? Because I mean, Oxford is obviously across the pond. And
I
CTI is
live in Colorado. My wife is from here,
Yep.
so we ended up here.
So pretty much the Alberta of US. So you have the Rockies and you have the joys of skiing every time, right?
Absolutely.
And
no oil.
No, yeah, there's that. There's that. Okay, so I understand the process of why you're with us now at GCTI. I'm curious first and foremost, why studying in philosophy and doing a master and why doing it across the pond, or why not doing it, I mean, in Canada or in US, or what brought you there first and foremost?
The short answer is I got in.
Okay.
When I finished my BA, I wasn't sure what I was going to do next, so I applied to graduate school in the UK because my initial interest was to study the First World War.
Okay.
After I graduated, I went back and took another course, a fourth year course at the University of Toronto on uh, modern military history that was taught by someone named David Stafford, who was originally from the UK. Um, and I got, I was quite familiar with the Second World War. I was less familiar with the First, but that's kind of what I was initially interested in. And plus, I had family who had died in both world wars in the Canadian forces, so there was an interest there as well.
Yes, you have a long lineage of serving, right? From what we spoke before.
Yes.
I find that amazing. And I mean, we're from the same country by all means, but it's different, different roots, if you wish, right? So the military from where I'm from is very different views from the public to what I hear the stories from English Canadians. It's amazing to see how generation on generation on generation serve and do the sacrifice for the country. Always amaze me. So, okay. So you are with GCTI now. You studied abroad. What made you change your form of research to, and I'm going to call it that way, but, and I'm mostly wrong, but I will call it prepper. That's a short form that I looked into your new field of research because pandemics can happen. We've seen it for 3-4 years. I mean, not apocalypse, but we never know if enemies will attack or threats the country where we live. It could be an EMP, it could be a nuclear bomb. There's so many things. So I'm just curious, what brought you there?
Part of it was that GCTI, who were interested in having me participate, are doing more current issues. And I'd also, on my own, I mean, I I read a lot about a lot of different things. So I have a whole library just on the war on terror. I used to live in New York. I was in New York for 9/11. I saw it happen. My wife worked 4 blocks away in Battery Park. She was on her way to work when the second plane hit, but the second plane literally flew past her building where a lot of her office mates were in the conference rooms, and saw that plane go right by them. I was on the Brooklyn Promenade by about 9:30 in the morning.
Mhm.
So at that point, the planes had hit, the buildings were on fire, and that's when I got up there. That's when more information started coming in. People had radios going. Then there was a notice that the Pentagon had been hit, and people were really freaking out. And then the South Tower collapsed, and I was sitting there and I watched it. Um, and the debris cloud blowing through Lower Manhattan. At that point, I went home because I didn't know where my wife was and wanted to try and get a hold of her. Um, so that alone inspired an existing interest in the circumstances that informed that event. And also, after in the time when I was finishing my doctorate, I was doing a lot of work expanding what I had worked on further into the 20th century. So I was looking at things like um, issues in medicine with involuntary uh, medical experimentation.
Mhm.
I was also looking at biological and chemical warfare. One of my contemporaries at Oxford wrote a book about Porton Down, which is the British chemical and biological warfare station. And apparently he was brought in as an expert witness to a hearing because in the 1950s, a British serviceman who volunteered at Porton Down died after being exposed to, I think, sarin.
Okay.
So he had been looking at this in detail, and I had read about the U.S. and the Soviet biowarfare programs, and and the Japanese one in World War II, and it's all rather depressing stuff. And Canada had a role as well.
Mhm.
The uh, Frederick Banting, who was one of the people who created insulin, was part of the Canadian project in World War II.
Okay. So definitely, I mean, there's definitely an interest there. Now, when you look into the 9/11, obviously you look into the terrorist aspect, and I'm just curious because I was talking to intelligence operator, and what they told me about when you look into the terrorist aspect, or it could be the extremist groups or whatnot, you need to also read about their side, how they see things. And
Mhm.
I'm curious if you actually read about how terrorists would see how they see and why they do their things, and if so, what did you read about? Like, what is the book? I'm curious because they're harder to find.
Yeah, they are one of the things that I looked at, for instance, was Ali Soufan's book, the FBI uh, sort of profiler who did most of the serious interrogation work before and during the War on Terror. The stuff that the CIA claimed they got from torture,
Mhm.
but in fact he was the person who did the interrogations that they claimed credit for.
Okay.
Um, and he brought his own, knowledge of being someone who spoke Arabic and um, whose family came from the Middle East, and an understanding of some of the issues that drove people. Um, so it's informative in that respect, but you are right that it's very difficult to get the other side's perspective because we have so demonized those people that I picked up things in bits and bobs. For instance, uh, I was reading something where they were looking at Muhammad Atta, who was flying the first plane that hit the
Yeah.
North Tower. And his experience was that he was Egyptian. He had gone to Europe to do graduate work. He had, by Egyptian standards, he had developed a quite serious and impressive education, but he couldn't find work in Egypt
Mhm.
because under the system at the time, It was a sort of a crony capitalistic system, authoritarian. And because he didn't have the connections to get work, he couldn't find work in his home country, and it drove him nuts.
Mhm.
Now, why you go from that to flying an airplane into something is, but you can begin to understand the early stages of radicalization
Yeah.
from that sense of alienation.
And I find that how they recruit, they're getting better and better, especially with all the internet and so on and so forth.
Hmm.
I mean, we've seen it during COVID. Al Qaeda was not censored on some social media, while some politicians were actually censored, which was very interesting to see whoever controls the machine really
Hmm.
decide what goes forward and not forward. Now, you said the same thing that I said. They're harder to find, and it brings up a question, because when we talk about intel gathering or analysis and so on and so forth, we need to look at every kind of possible reference. Lately, I'm doing my master project and so on, and there's some subject that I found that there's only one way of seeing it in the research that we can find. It doesn't offer the other side. And personally, I believe that there's always two sides to swords. And
Oh yeah.
right. So how is it hard to find the truth when we can find that there's a narrative controlled? That was not a question I sent you. That's a new one.
Um, One of the barriers, and I'm as guilty as this as anyone, is language.
Mhm.
If if you're someone who knows how to access the appropriate language sources, it's probably easier. If I spoke Arabic,
Yeah.
I'm willing to bet I could find a lot of stuff that only a select number of people in the West read, because there aren't that many. There are now more Arabic speaking intelligence agents, but historically, it's not been a big thing. I know that, for instance, there was a book I read a few years ago that I got about a guy who was the lead American in the Middle East, who ended up being, it was a book by Kai Bird, and he ended up dying in the 1983 attack on the U.S. Embassy in Beirut.
Yeah.
But he was one of the few people who had made an investment in that region of the world, because at the time, I mean, the Cold War is what predominated, and the Middle East was very much a secondary theater of operations. So one of the people who he had developed relations with was um, Ali Hassan Salameh, who was implicated in the 72 attack on the Olympics. And the Israelis ended up assassinating him. And he was like, "Why did you do that?" He was one of my sources. And they said, "Well, you didn't tell us not to."
Mm.
So, um, but his loss was significant because they lost someone who actually had, who I think spoke the language and had in-country knowledge. And so that's always going to be an issue. And also the sheer range of languages. I mean, one of my closest friends in England is Pashtun. He grew up in the UK, but his family was from Afghanistan. His brother was in the British Air Force, a medic, and they sent him there because he spoke Pashto fluently. Um, and his brother, you know, Alam told me his brother was in situations where he was trying to explain to officers, they're making fun of you, and you don't know it because you don't understand the culture and what they're saying, but I do. And so you get all of those cultural subtleties and the language barriers that I think present a huge problem.
I agree, and I'm going to push forward with this one. I remember when I took a commercial flight to go to Iraq when I was deployed, and the person I was flying with was our um, were a translator. And he was from Lisbon, and by all means, he was fully Canadian, serving in the military. Great guy, love him. And he's like, there's a difference between you and I when we serve if we get caught down there. And I was like, what is it? And he's like, if you get caught, you're gonna get beheaded. If I get caught, I get torture until I die. Right. And there's a different, because he's like, I'm one of them.
Hmm.
Right. My roots are here. And because of this, I will be treated differently, and I'll pay the price as a traitor, which was a very interesting, uh, um, very interesting thing of seeing, right? He still goes serve the
Hmm.
country, despite the danger that is, I won't say greater because you die at the end, but the pain that will be with it would be different.
Right.
It's extremely interesting to see. And I mean, you were not probably in Canada in 2014 when we had our attack on the parliament, and one of the soldiers, Cyril, was killed. But it is extremely interesting and frightening to know that on that day, the, the 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 criminal who did the attack was not part of the people who were actually followed or surveilled.
Hmm.
It was not part of those whatever 100% were quote unquote dangerous that day. And I'm convinced it's the same. We see the same in Western countries across board. Um, do you think, and I mean it's an easy answer, I'm sure, but just for starters, do you think that having the borders so open, and that is in US and Canada, we have the same problem, will bring us more problem? And if those problem will be, are we talking about attacks of a bomb type, or are we talking about bio problem? Are we talking about, what are we talking about? What is the fear? What are the next stage? Because if we look at the late message that's been given by terrorist group, it's been 2 3 years that they've been silent,
Hmm.
really quiet.
The open border issue is an interesting one. It's something I've thought about because I mean I'm an immigrant here, um, and if you want to get across the border without being caught, it's not too hard if you put some effort into it. It's a question of what do you do once you get there, and we focus a lot on mass casualty events, but it doesn't take much to pull one off. I remember there was one in France 2 years ago where it was a guy in a truck. Um, it can be something as simple as that. Just get into a transport truck and drive through a crowd of people. Um, and you never know where it's going to come from. I mean, it's worth remembering that the worst attack in U.S. history before 9/11 was Oklahoma, and that was an American.
Oh,
The Timothy McVeigh, and they found him quickly because he did a pretty bad job of disguising his movements, but
mhm,
it it opened up a whole can of this whole weird right wing um, subculture that is all over the country that had been enraged by both Waco and the Ruby Ridge fiasco when they were in a standoff with Randy Weaver and ended up killing his wife and I think his son, and
mhm.
a federal agent was killed in the process as well. So depending upon the circumstances, you can worry about the border, but you also have to understand there are existing grievances within the indigenous population.
Yeah.
I mean, the guy in 2014 was a Canadian.
Yes,
He
yes.
was wasn't he a former serviceman?
No, he was not. Actually, at that time, there was a reservist who actually hit the fence of where the prime minister lived.
Hmm.
In this case, he was actually from Alberta, working Fort Mac on the rigs, the oil rigs.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, as I said, you don't necessarily know where it might come from. The, you know, a relatively open border is for a whole variety of reasons has so many advantages that um, you can't really defend against everything all the time.
Hmm.
You can create uh, barriers, if you like. It's like building the wall on the Mexican border. It doesn't work.
Hmm.
When they built that section that they said can't be climbed over, somebody showed how they could get over it in about 20 seconds.
Yes, and I mean, there's no perfect doors either. Let's be honest. Most of the door can be kicked down. Um, I don't get me wrong though. On the north side of the border, you can have nothing for miles on. So it is easier, I believe, to cross in
Mhm.
this. And I'm not inciting anyone to do so, but I'm just
Right.
saying our border is not the most secure between Canada and United States. Um, do you believe that we're going to see things turning like we saw as an example in France or in UK? I mean, there's areas right now in Paris that police don't even police. There's areas who actually Sharia laws is running. And I'm not saying that's going to be like that for every Five Eyes country or so on, but I'm just saying, do you think that we're going to see a resurging aspect or shift? Right, because our countries are built on Catholic and Christian and so on and so forth, but we have already a city, I don't remember the name, but it's in Michigan where they actually play the chants, the songs at night,
Mhm.
right? Do you think we're gonna see a shift going on, or
It depends on how many people come in and where they come from. I know that Canada's had enormous Indian
yeah,
immigration. The last time I was in Toronto, I hadn't been, I used to live in Toronto and then I moved to the UK and I went back and forth with some frequency and then there was a big gap. And when I was there in 2018, I literally didn't recognize parts of the city anymore.
yeah,
Part of it was just things had changed. The landmarks weren't there anymore. The Honest Ed's at the time was a hole in the ground. Um, but it was also, wow, I mean, I feel like a minority. It was kind of weird. Um, I know that Canadian immigration policy generally, it's sort of a point system in terms of the sort of people they want to attract. It tends to be people who are much more highly educated,
mhm,
uh, potentially with the exception of people who have refugee status. And there are Syrian families in my hometown now, and the thing is, a lot of the Syrians who escaped and ended up in Western countries were part of the sort of educated elite within Syria who had the know-how to get away.
yeah,
Um, I mean, it's always possible, and in what is supposed to be a tolerant, multi-ethnic society, I mean, there was once a time when conflicts between just Protestants and Catholics was a huge issue. In the States and in Canada. In the 1928 presidential election, when Al Smith was running as the Democratic candidate, there were all these home rule, not Rome rule posters going up around the country because he was a Catholic guy from New York.
mhm,
Um, and, JFK was the first Catholic president ever elected, and that was in 1960.
yeah,
So, it took a while.
yeah,
Um, Obviously, Canada, we've had a slightly different history with lots and lots of French Canadian prime ministers. Um, some of the best, like Wilfrid Laurier was prime minister for 16 years.
mhm,
Um, but those, I grew up in a very historically Protestant part of Eastern Ontario, and back in the day, I mean, the different Protestant denominations argued with one another all the time. So
mhm,
the Baptists are arguing with the Presbyterians, who are arguing with the Methodists, who are arguing with the Anglicans. So um, I think it's part and parcel of any kind of diverse society. The thing that I think most people want to see is some sense of investment in the country in which you've gone to. And that doesn't mean, say, abandoning Islam. It just means understanding, that you are now a citizen of a completely different place.
yeah. And it makes sense. I believe that there's a form of adaptation that has to be done. I mean, wherever you travel, you gotta accept the values or the way they live for the time being
Mhm.
there. You're not showing up and asking them to change for your own being, which in my own thought makes sense. Okay, so we've seen that you have over 3,000 books behind you. Which one is your favorite?
Oh God, I mean, I don't know. Um, Trying to think of ones that they're weird ones that have stuck in my mind. David Hackworth's book about his experience in Vietnam about face was really interesting because he started his career in the military literally as a kid. He lied about his age to get in the Merchant Marine, and then he ended up in the U.S. Army in Korea, and I think he was made an officer from the ranks,
Okay.
and then he was in Vietnam on several tours, and eventually broke with the U.S. military based on his experiences and was sort of cashiered from the military and moved to Australia.
Hmm.
At the time, I think he was the most highly decorated officer in the U.S. Armed Forces, and he was alienated from everything he saw. And sort of a companion to that was reading A Bright Shining Lie by Neil Sheehan about um, oh God, someone who Hackworth talked a lot about. They made a movie about him with Bill Pullman, with not Bill Pullman. Anyway, he was someone who ended up going on from the military to the civilian side of things. Very John Paul Van, that was who it is, and also an outstanding officer, a rather complicated personal history, but he ran into the same problems in that he was trying to explain to his superiors what was happening on the ground, and they didn't want to hear it. So, you know, it was enlightening, and it was sort of it informed a lot of my other reading on the subject, where the Vietnam War was a debacle precisely because the U.S. was trying to fight the war they wanted to fight rather than the war that was happening.
So, okay, let's go with another one because I'm just, as you speak, I have ideas coming up and so on and so forth. So now I'm curious about uh, we don't know where it's gonna happen, and let's touch wood so it doesn't happen. We don't want attacks. We don't want more terrorists trying to violate the way we live. But um, how so I when I asked Todd told me that there will be convergence of convergence onto the terrorist attack that's going to happen, or the next attack that will happen. Which your background in bio warfare, in history, because I mean we learn from the past, we don't learn from the future. What do you think is going to happen? Because I mean we've been now 25 years in Afghanistan. It's over. We didn't make it better necessarily. That's my own opinion. But we've seen Vietnam. We've seen World War One, two. We've seen the Cold War. Um, what is the next thing is we gonna head? Because if we look at how United States run, they have not had many years without war or fight, a battle. So what is the next things we're gonna face now? Right, we have
I,
seen Iran, we have seen Palestine and Israel. What is the next thing that's gonna fall off the boat?
I think there are a couple of things. One is there is a strong likelihood of some sort of, I believe we're due for a much more serious pandemic than COVID, and that will have enormous destabilizing effects. Um, if something like the 1918 flu happened now, the death toll would probably be somewhere in the, I think one of the estimates was somewhere like at least 300 million people
Um,
dying, um, and possibly more. The From a sort of a peer-to-peer standpoint, I mean the real flashpoint is China, I think, and it's not necessarily China with the U.S. or the West per se, because although the Belt and Road Initiative that they've done was designed to pull their neighbors into their sphere of influence, their neighbors don't like them. So there's a question of whether or not, their economic dominance will matter, and at what point do they get irritated by their neighbors not following the plan they want them to. I mean, obviously, you've got Taiwan, um, and Taiwan is the world's biggest maker of chips.
yep.
And, you know, that's an area that China has a real interest in. I just was reading something last night looking at the Trump administration changing U.S. policy to allow NVIDIA to sell their second best chip to China. And interestingly, Xi Jinping said no. He said, no, I want China to have its own domestic capability. I don't want to be relying on foreign imports because then we're vulnerable to having it cut off. So both sides made moves that no one was anticipating.
Yeah.
You know, the American administration thought that they could make China dependent upon foreign chips, and the Chinese said no. We're going to keep working on our own to try and reach parity with other countries. So it's kind of a mess. I'm, I've always been a little bit skeptical of even though China's economy continues to grow enormously, they're running into two problems. One is demographic, their population is shrinking, and the other has to do with public debt. They have a lot that they're not talking about. And so it is entirely possible that even with all of this export-driven economic growth, that certain aspects of the economy are quite fragile.
Mhm.
And I don't think they have the same sort of feedback mechanisms that you have in the West, where they will be able to intervene as quickly if something falls apart. And
Uh,
also, no one's going to want to help them.
There's that. There's that for sure. I have one more question for the fun of it. I grew up, and I'm pretty sure it's similar, but for you, I grew up knowing that the big red army is wrong. Russia are the bad guys. In the past was the German Nazis were the bad
Hmm.
guys, so on and so forth. Now, recently I spoke to one of my good friends who's from Russia. She moved to Canada at 14 years old, learned the language, went to school, so on and so forth. And it was the first question that I ask is, "What do you think about Putin?" Right? Not the meal, but the person.
Yes.
And she's like, You know what? It's gonna sound weird, but I don't hate him." And I was like, "Okay, well, I need to know what you mean." So she's like, "Well, compared to the person who was there prior, he allowed us to have way more freedom, and he did way more things for the population itself than the previous person." Now, um, and by all means, I don't agree with whatever is going on in the war and so on and so forth. That's not what I'm speaking about. But again, a sword has two sides. What do you think about Putin itself as a leader, if you wish?
He, the initially, he was very focused on um, restoring a sense of Russian greatness. He has a certain um, imperial bias, for lack of a better way of putting it.
Mm-hmm.
He has said that he thought the fall of the Soviet Union was the greatest geopolitical disaster of the 20th century. Um, where I think Putin trips himself up is assuming that Russia Russia's power was more than its military. In the 1970s, Helmut Schmidt, the German chancellor, described the Soviet Union as upper Volta with missiles. Um, and that's even though the economy has expanded somewhat, a lot of it is still in primary extraction industries,
Yeah.
and so they're highly susceptible to economic shocks. For instance, if the oil prices go down, it's not good for them. They needed to diversify their economy, which, what happened when the Soviet Union collapsed is basically, the people who became the oligarchs bought up existing businesses for pittance and suddenly found themselves very wealthy. Uh, Putin's deal with them was cut me my slice and you can keep running it. If you don't, I'll put you in jail. That's what happened to Mikhail Khodorkovsky. Um, I think at a certain point, I mean, I understand people saying they restored our feeling of significance of greatness. And I don't think anyone should ignore how important that is, particularly to a country like Russia, which for centuries has had a kind of an inferiority complex with respect to the West. They they have both embraced and then held the West at a distance because of this insistence of and it's something you get with like Alexander Dugin, these conservative Russian philosophers saying that Russia is not the West. We have our soul is different. The Russian soul is something that is unique. Um, they're they want the benefits of, say, Western economic development without necessarily adopting Western culture. And this has been a tension in Russia that goes back to Ivan the Terrible. Um, you know, which way do we face? Are we something unique? And that tension exists today. We want to be seen as important and significant, but we don't want people to point out the weaknesses underlying our own country. And I think Putin has that disease as much as anyone else. The when you look at the fighting in Ukraine, they've been stalled for 4 years. They're
Mhm.
actually losing ground now.
Mhm.
And that's against an opponent with a population which was one third, one quarter the size.
Yep.
They are having their butts kicked and by an opponent who understands asymmetric warfare and also doesn't conduct meat assaults, as they call them. And it's weird because the Ukrainians talk about the Russians just doing human wave assaults to try and overwhelm positions. This is something the Russians did in World War II, where the Germans would be like, we don't get it. If they maneuvered around us, they could surround us and capture us, but they ran straight at us.
Yeah.
So
The,
yeah.
it's extremely interesting, and I have a friend who was over there fighting for Ukraine, and he was telling me that the soldier are not trained enough. Number one, a simple example as if you're in a gunfight, right, and your buddy is getting shot at, you need to keep shooting because if you go take care of the person beside you, there's chance that you get shot as well. And he's like, he's seen that over and over where the young soldier will have his counterpart, the body beside him, will get shot, and they go straight to protect and try to save the person. The problem is there's still bullets flying.
Mhm.
So to me, what I see here is a lack of training, right? And by all means, there's a lot of affection with your partner, right? Like you want to save him. I get that part, but
Yeah.
there's a lack of training where you need to do what you got to do. There's rules, right? There's way of doing things. And it was not seen. Also, I was told that, to find, let's say, a sniper position, they would send a group of 30 to 40 soldier. They get decimated. They're going to send another group 4 or 5 hours later and so on and so forth, until they find the place and then bomb where the sniper is, right? So you have enough people to use them as fresh meat, right? Sadly speaking, or you don't care for them, right? Or it's a way of doing. But
And they're running out of people.
they had a large military. They had over 900,000 soldiers, right, at the beginning, I believe,
Mhm.
uh, which obviously they're losing side, they're losing land and then so on and so forth, but they're losing bodies. And I don't think you can just do a boot camp and go straight to war. I don't think you know enough at that point, or
Yeah.
you're prepared enough to be militarized into a war itself. Very interesting. Now we both know. Well, I mean, I know based on the books you have behind you, based on your life of learning. What is the next subject you would like to learn, or is in the paper for you to start looking into?
Right now, uh, I was made a fellow with something called the North Atlantic Veterans Initiative, which is a 6-month appointment where they've asked me to do research for them, and I have to crank out 2 papers with a contemporary who I only met last week. One of them that I am looking at doing, and we have to make a presentation at the end of the month, is changes in military medicine and between, say, the war on terror in Ukraine. I've already pulled up a lot of articles. I've done reading. among other things, I'm also a licensed EMT. I haven't really practiced much, but um, I understand some things about emergency medicine in the field. And the things that we're doing in, say, Afghanistan, you can't do in Ukraine.
Hmm.
One of the things, a friend of mine here who was a doctor in the British Parachute Regiment, who served on something called a MERT, which was essentially they stuck an emergency room effectively in a Chinook helicopter.
Hmm.
So they were able to land exactly where someone was injured, do rapid extraction, and start working on them before they even got to the hospital. And it was the person had to be either an anesthesiologist or an emergency medicine expert. And my friend's an anesthesiologist,
Yeah.
and and then it was a paramedic and a nurse. And the thing that they were dealing with, and you were in Afghanistan, were you not?
Iraq, Iraq.
Or you were in Iraq?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the big thing, and I know in Iraq it was an issue as well. In Afghanistan, the big thing was IEDs.
Hmm.
So the one of the things, one of the people one of the books I read, they focused on this one guy, a Royal Marine, who lost three limbs in an IED attack, but then recovered. Often the troops were going out with tourniquets just loosely around each one of their limbs in case of an IED attack, because they discovered that you can leave tourniquets on. When I did EMT training the first time in New York in 2008, they weren't big on tourniquets because they were worried about tissue damage and necrosis. They found in the war on terror, you can actually leave them on for a fair amount of time.
Yeah.
Um, for what they found in Ukraine, the two things occurred. One is that you can't just helicopter evacuate people in a near peer adversary conflict, because the first thing they do is shoot down the helicopter.
Yep.
So they had to come up with ways of extracting people that were different. They came up literally with drone extraction. I think it's a vehicle that's really low to the ground that they can get in, throw someone into, and drive it out. But before they'd come up with that, they were using tourniquets, but they weren't able to extract casualties. And then they were beginning to get limb loss due to necrosis, uh, because people were waiting so long to be extracted. I mean, the guys in Afghanistan, the book I read by Emily Mayhew, it was like 15 minutes,
Yeah.
um, which is nothing. Um, and I mean that's probably better than a lot of civilian medical services here. You can get there fast, but it's a question of whether or not you can get the person out with any speed. Let's say it's a car accident. Often paramedics are standing waiting while firemen are pulling them out of the car.
Yeah.
Um, and another thing, at least with civilian medical services, is that you're not allowed on the site until it's secured.
Yep.
Um, Whereas I'm sure in a combat scenario, you know, you're there. It's like, yeah, I'm being shot at. So, um, so that's, I'm doing research to look at what the changes are, and, what the conclusions are in terms of speed, in terms of extraction, wound management. A lot of, the Israelis a while ago came up with um, clotting bandages, which have been uh, a big change. Um, I had a friend who was in Ukraine doing aid work, and she said that they asked her for tampons for bullet wounds,
Hmm.
which I sort of thought, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, it does.
I mean, I have I have seen a gunshot wound to the chest before. When I was doing a rotation for EMT training here, they brought a 16-year-old kid who had been shot fortunately for him, on the right side,
Yep.
um, and fully conscious and very polite. It was weird. He kept on saying, "Sir, please stop doing that," when they were poking him. Um, but yeah, it was a 9 millimeter, so a very small hole.
Yep.
And thankfully, they were able to get a chest drain in him, and nothing really vital got hit.
Good.
But I'm sure that if I don't think they did anything other than put a chest cover over it and probably had to burp the wound periodically if they were getting air in it. Um, but yeah, and these are all things that interest me because I've done a bit of training and I'm interested to know. It's so weird with warfare that you have all of these techniques that have been developed over the 20th century to address what we do to try and kill each other
Yep.
so that we can save people. It's like it's
It,
a little creepy.
and it evolves, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, right? There's difference just from Afghanistan to Ukraine. So it evolves very, very fast when people are trying to win the war. I guess that's how I see it. And I think as well in this case, when if we talk about Afghanistan versus Russia, well, a terrorist group who's now recognized as a government, but at that time they're just a terrorist group, right? So the funding and so on and so forth is not the same, although they had a large funding, and I mean the leadership is not the same either, right? So the caring for the people is not the same. But just like you said, the UAV and so on and so forth, there's a lot of things that comes across, right, which it change, and I mean we can just look at the, the weapon they use now to stop those UAV is magical, right? Let's go with that word.
Yeah.
So I find that super interesting. Will you join us when we have a debate? Because I'm trying to get special mind like
Oh,
yours.
absolutely. It's funny. I was thinking one of the questions that you had sent me that I was just thinking about was that what what do you see as being more of a threat, whether it's say uh, a terrorist attack versus say natural disaster,
Yeah,
pandemic, something like that. And one of the things that just as an aside that popped into my head is remembering the tsunami in 2006.
yeah.
Quarter of a million people died in a day. So it's worth remembering that the worst disasters we've experienced come about from things that we have no control over.
So I agree, but pandemic can be created by the human, technically speaking.
It
Um,
can be, yes, or
um,
by poor management of a situation like Ebola in Congo right now. If the if the Doge cuts hadn't happened, the U.S. response would have been much more rapid, and they would have been able to control it because they cut things like medical response. You know,
that makes sense.
unfortunately.
Um, but okay, so that can be so okay. Now I will push it a different way. I will close it after, but that's you just created a
Okay,
question in my
sure.
mind. So but we can also create nature reaction. I mean, we know we can create clouds and rain and so on and so forth. So I wouldn't be surprised that down the road we can create tsunami, technically speaking,
But
right?
theoretically, you could with a nuclear device.
Which there is plenty in the world.
Yeah,
Uh, so I think I'm back to the same question I had at the beginning. When we have a narrative, right? A narrative is given. How do we know the truth?
right.
Right.
And in the questions that you sent me, one of them is, for instance, human the use of biological weapons. I mean, the Russians certainly made a huge investment in the 1970s and 80s in this, and in building these secret cities in places like Stepnogorsk in Kazakhstan. Uh, I mean, and those programs were dismantled. Uh, but there was a rumor, for instance, that they made 10 tons of smallpox virus, and in an unhabituated population, smallpox has a fatality rate of 90%.
Which is
So if it ever escaped, it's why New World populations were wiped out so quickly in encountering the Spaniards. It's because they had no natural immunity. Um, and that the problem with using disease as a weapon is you can't control it.
yeah, yeah.
So, I mean, most of the people who have looked at it have basically said, well, we can certainly make weapons, but we don't know that it's like the Germans using gas in World War One. It's prevailing westerlies. And so occasionally they would release gas and it would blow back on their own troops.
Hmm. Yeah. It's like on a larger scale, it's pepper spray.
Yeah.
You pepper spray someone, you'll get some, but larger scale, obviously. Thank you so much for coming today. We are, like I said, I'm going to try to get a few of those genius mind. That's all I'll call you guys because I find that you have so much knowledge. I love it. And I'll have a set of questions. And I want to create a small debate. So probably in a month or so,
Cool.
or after summer. But I appreciate you coming. Last question.
Mhm.
What is the next step for you at GCTI?
Um, I mean, I'm a faculty advisor. It would appear that I am getting more students, so it's going to be making sure that the areas that I cover for GCTI, the academic areas, are meet the standards that they want, and potentially, I want to talk to Todd about expanding the course offerings.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to all of this. Once again, thank you so much, Dr. Hunter, to be with us. And that was GCTI Podcast.
Thank you very much.